right there.
Damn
Kenyon Martin has re-signed with the New York Knicks on Thursday. He was a 13-year veteran. He played 18 regular season games with the Knicks last season, averaging 7.2 points on 60% shooting and 5.3 rebounds. So the Knicks got Kenyon Martin, who is 35 years old, and I'll be asking Jeff about that later on in the show if we have time today or tomorrow. Speaking of which, that is your update for Sports World Radio on this Thursday. I am Sean Mann, your update man. Back to Jeff Eskow, host of the Sports World Radio.
All right, welcome back to the show. That update was brought to you by BuyHuntingEquipment.com. For all your camping, fishing, hunting, and outdoor needs, head on over to BuyHuntingEquipment.com. That's BuyHuntingEquipment.com. All right, welcome back to the show.
Oh, boy.
I like Kenyon Martin being on the Knicks. I like that. He brings tough. With Kenyon Martin and Meta World Peace, that's a nice 1-2 punch there, baby. I kind of like that.
I got Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah, I like that. But you got two tough guys who like to play rough and tough. Kenyon Martin and Meta World Peace. It's going to be nice. They'll protect Carmelo Anthony now, which should be kind of fun. All right, what do you say we bring in the hockey guru of ITM himself, Mr. Ron Gallo?
And Laura's got her Skype on.
Yeah, I figured she would, but let's get Ron in first. I figured she would. What's up there, Mr. Gallo?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Oh, I love that voice. I missed that voice. Say hello again. The hell is that? Is that your phone?
We are family.
Woohoo! He's playing it off of his phone. Unbelievable.
How you guys doing? It's been a long time, Jeff and John.
Yes, and you know something,
got his
Ron?
own
I'm
shit.
doing good, but Jeff says he's got a bone to pick with you.
Yes, I heard that before the update, so let's get this over and done with.
Now. Okay, now. Hold on. Laura, I'm going to bring you in just a minute. I know you're probably going bananas over there. Come on, like I have on in support. I know. Hold on a second now. Just chill out, relax there, Miss Laura. I'll get you in 1 minute because I want to hear what Ron has to say about this. And then after Ron says what he has to say, then I'll bring you in, okay? Just in case we have little technical difficulties. That's the only reason why. Ron, the hockey freaking god, Mr. Gary Bettman, Mr. Moron himself, okay?
Yeah.
Changes divisions, names, and what's that? I have no problem with that. But if you're going to put teams where they're supposed to be after this sort of change that they made, why is the goddamn Detroit freaking Red Wings in the Eastern Conference Division in the Atlantic Division? No, at that.
Maybe they're on the move. I don't know. Detroit filed for bankruptcy, but get this, Detroit is getting a brand new $400 million stadium.
Yeah, but isn't Detroit in Michigan?
Detroit is in Michigan. They're in the Central Time Zone. You and I had this discussion, so I mean, we'll pick up that bone that we thought we buried a while back. But Detroit, you're absolutely right, is the one team that should have been in the Central Division to balance the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference.
Correct.
When you look at these two conferences, you're dealing with only 14 teams in the West.
Correct.
And you have 16 in the East.
Correct.
You could have made it 15 and 15 by putting Detroit in the Central Division with, get this, Chicago, Minnesota,
Dallas,
Nashville, St. Louis, Winnipeg, and also in there Colorado and Dallas.
Correct. That's the Central Division. Put freaking Detroit in there.
Absolutely.
That's the only bone I really have with Gary. Now, I want to know something. Who made this decision? Was it the owners and Gary Bettman, or was it just Mr. Gary Bettman himself?
I really don't know. I mean, it baffles a lot of people, but somewhere somebody put this in, and I'm only speculating here, but it has got to do something with the Eastern Seaboard having more eyes, having more televisions, more opportunity to sell the game in the East than in the West.
But the game has always been bigger in the East than the West. That's why
I'm not arguing that. But you're absolutely right. And, you know, Detroit, I mean, we're dealing with, in the Atlantic Division, we haven't even talked about the Metropolitan Division yet, but in the Atlantic Division, you have Boston, That's East Coast. You have Buffalo. Okay, that's still East Coast. You have Florida, very obviously East Coast. And you have a couple of Canadian teams that are in the Eastern time zone with the Montreal Canadiens and the Ottawa Senators. You have Tampa Bay. You also have another Canadian-based team, Toronto. Toronto, I think this is where the problem lies, is because Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, 3 Canadian teams, are closer to Detroit and Buffalo are to other teams, meaning that Detroit would now be only closest to Chicago, Minnesota, and Nashville and St. Louis, and those teams are not very close. So they did it based on proximity, not because of the time zone. They based it on the fact that the Windsor Bridge will take you from Detroit to Toronto in a matter of a half hour or 45 minutes.
Unfreaking believable.
Hello, Laura.
Hey,
What's
Laura.
your take about all this stuff with hockey? How you doing?
I'm doing fine. This whole thing, him thinking I'm going bananas, blah, blah, blah. I'm chilled, dude. Relax.
You can talk. Hey, Jeff, what if we had Gary Bettman on with us right now? Oh, my gosh. Jeff
Oh.
would explode.
It almost sounds like he's saying Miss Gary Bettman, too.
Miss Gary Bettman. I'm
Yes,
not
but
gonna.
it sounds like you're saying.
I'm not gonna miss him
No
one bit.
way.
No, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
not.
Jeff,
I'm not
miss
gonna.
Gary Bettman.
I'm not gonna miss him one bit. I
You're
don't-
missing
on
him. You
the
need
show.
to work on your aim, man.
I don't mind the Metropolitan Division. Okay, I don't mind that at
I
all.
do.
What I do mind is them putting the Detroit in the Eastern and the Atlantic and not in the Western and the Central. That's totally stupid because everybody else around them is in the Central and they're in the East.
The problem that I have with the Metropolitan Division is, where does this name come from? Okay, so you're dealing with a metropolitan area being New York with the Rangers and the Islanders, and across the river you've got New Jersey, and not very far away you have Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and okay, it's a bit of a stretch, but you can throw Washington in there, and then all of a sudden there's Columbus and Carolina in the Metropolitan Division.
I agree. They should have put Boston and Buffalo in there.
Move Boston or Buffalo and move Carolina, Columbus over to the Atlantic Division, where I think that they belong, and take one team, Detroit, and move them into the Central Division, and you have a very balanced conference versus conference. The Western Conference will be made up of the Pacific and the Central Division, 7 and 8 teams. The Eastern Conference could be made up of the Metropolitan Division and the Atlantic Division, 8 teams in the Metropolitan and 7 in the Atlantic Division. Hey, guess what? You're at 15 teams on each half of the conference.
Now, there's only 8 teams that make the playoffs on each side, correct?
That's correct. So it's harder to make the playoffs now in the East than it is in the West.
You ain't whistling Dixie on that, brother.
So
That's
3
gonna be
teams.
nuts, because you can actually have the Devils, the Islanders, the Rangers, the Flyers, the Penguins, and Washington all in the playoffs.
And nobody else.
And nobody, right? Well, that's 6 teams, and then you can have Boston and Buffalo, and then nobody else, and then what the hell?
Right.
I mean, that's just nuts.
It is. I mean, everybody's kind of come to terms with it, but I guarantee you that there will be a bit of a cry as the season progresses, because can you imagine the outcry if the New York Rangers are looking at the numbers and they realize that they would have been in had Detroit not been in the Eastern Conference?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. But it's hard to sell Detroit in the Western Conference. You know what I mean?
It's not hard to sell them in the Central Division, though. The Western Conference really does not come into play until you start lining up the teams for the postseason. When the playoffs kick in, I mean, during the regular season, your focus is on teams inside your division first, and then inside your conference second, and then inside the league third. Okay, so your division is what matters the most, and then the conference matters second. You don't really have to worry about what the other conference is doing. So put Detroit in the Central Division, and who becomes their automatic rivalries? Chicago.
Yeah, exactly.
Minnesota.
Exactly.
St. Louis.
Dallas, even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, even you know what? Even Winnipeg.
Well, Winnipeg has something with Detroit right now. Absolutely, I don't disagree that. I mean, you can look at Winnipeg having some ties to Columbus and Carolina because, of course, they came from Atlanta. But you know what? That's old news. That's history. That's water under the bridge. The bigger problem here is when you look at it and you see 14 teams versus 16 teams, you know there's a problem. And somebody overlooked something as simple as Detroit can fit better in the Central Division than they can in the Eastern Conference.
And then you got three Canadian teams in the Atlantic.
You have 3 Canadian teams in the Atlantic Division, none in the Metropolitan Division. And then you'll have one in the Central Division, and then you have 3 more in the Pacific Division.
Yeah, that's freaking crazy, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the Pacific Division, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with 2 time zones in essence. You're dealing with the Pacific time zone and you're dealing with the Mountain time zone.
Correct.
With the Central Division, you're dealing with Central time zone, and there's nobody there on the Eastern time zone. I don't think Nashville's 3 hours ahead. I think that Nashville's in a Central time zone.
Yes, they are.
So why is Detroit all the way over there? They're in the Central time zone.
Exactly. That's what I have a major beef with that. Laura, what do you think? That's a good opinion. I like that.
She had something she probably had to take care of, but she'll be right back probably.
No big deal.
My opinion is they should just kept it the way it was. I think it's the most stupidest thing to change the whole format. Why don't you just keep it the way it was?
The problem with the way it was, Sean, is that what they were trying to do is they were trying to make it more of a race at the top. What was happening is if you look at some of the numbers, in the Eastern Conference last year, Pittsburgh finishes the regular season with 72 points. That was a runaway winner in the Atlantic Division. Next up is the New York Rangers with 56 points. You look at the Northeast Division, you've got Montreal, Boston, and you have Toronto, all with more points than the New York Rangers. And then you look in the Southeast Division, which is where Winnipeg was still playing out of. Only one team, the Washington Capitals, had more points than the New York Rangers. So the problem is that they were looking at this, and you've got the Washington Capitals, who come, in essence, tied with the New York Rangers, but they're sitting in 3rd place instead of sitting in 6th or 7th, simply we're leading the Southeast Division. So there is a desire to make sure that the top team in each division gets recognized for their achievements throughout the regular season, and they seat that team either 1st or 2nd in the conference based on the other division's leader. And then everybody else gets seated below those top 2 teams, even though team number 3 in next season will have more points or potentially more points than the number 2 team. But that's just because you're recognizing the top 2 teams in the divisions. Recognizing the top 3 teams in the divisions was what was causing everybody a bit of an issue over the past few years. And they thought that this might help that situation. But now, and you guys know this, what's going to happen in the future? You're dealing with you're dealing with one team in essence that knows that they're going to get bounced out of the Eastern Conference playoff seeding simply because there's one too many teams in the Eastern Conference.
Carolina and Columbus are screwed.
They really are. I mean, Carolina is a Stanley Cup champion, not that far removed. You look at the options and the opportunities Carolina is going to have playing against New Jersey, New York, Islanders, New York Rangers, Philadelphia Flyers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Washington Capitals. And they've got their work cut out for them over there in the Metropolitan Division for sure.
I mean, they're pretty much screwed. I mean, you could pretty much have 6 teams coming out of one division and only leaving 2 teams left to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. That's nuts.
That's what I'm saying. Like when you look at last year, I mean, Ted, you almost had that situation. When you look at the divisional breakdown, you had one team that came out of the Southeast. One team, the Washington Capitals, they come out because they were the number 1 team in the Southeast. But when you look at those numbers, they literally finished only 2 points. That's one game better than the New York Islanders, but they got seeded third instead of being seeded second or second last.
They should have done something and spreaded this out. Shouldn't have put everybody in one freaking division like that.
In hindsight, it's always easy to look at a final template and go, oh, we should have maybe did that. What the problem's going to be is that you don't want to be tinkering with the systems too many times.